conference again. I hope we are truly watching this recording in May, but we're doing it in advance. So thank you so much for being with us this year again.
Thank you, Artem. It's become a bit of a habit now because I think this is the 3rd year in a row. And each one gets better. So lovely to do.
Oh, you're very kind. So since we're doing an interview, I would love to ask you a lot of questions on story bridging. But first and foremost, tell me and our audience what story bridging is and what is it used for? Maybe what is at the core of story bridging process that you have developed?
Okay. I think this will come out during our interview, during our chat. But essentially, it's aimed at building, at this difficult time, building bridges between people rather than all the walls that exist and seem to get more and more, and doing it in a way that's different, that's not too process-like, not too left brain only, not too structured, but allows space for the heart and allows lots of space for flexibility and something different happening so that people can really find each other.
And what is this process like used for in maybe in organizations or in family life or in personal life?
Okay. At the national level, you might say that if people shared stories and used the talking cure more, there would be less war and less conflict. At the business level, between employers and employees, instead of the dissatisfaction and two sides belonging to the same entity becoming one side, at the community level, at the relational level, and even at the individual level, where something about our persona and what we convey as we talk isn't quite congruent, isn't quite authentic. And the bridging, in order to make that happen, is between ourselves. So we need to dig deep, look inside, and bridge internally before we can bridge externally.
Lovely.
So it takes on many aspects at different levels.
Oh, awesome. I think we will discover those aspects in more detail. But for now, I would like to hear your story. Like, what events have influenced your passion for story bridging, and what were you hoping for by doing this work?
Okay. I guess it started a long way back, and we can get into that a bit more. I'm a child of the apartheid era in South Africa, so I grew up in a society that was very conflicted and very separated, very polarized, lots of hate, not much attempt at connecting and understanding and being together. Then came the period when that seemed to have changed with the advent of Nelson Mandela. But since then, in the subsequent 25 years, we've had exactly the same thing, but perhaps worse. And the hatred has increased, and the divisions have increased, and the need for bridging has increased. So I think that's been one of my prime drivers, prime things behind it. I had an incident when I worked for my firm in London, and it was quite strange, really, because I felt a compassion that I'd never before felt for people. And these were people who lived under the bridges on pieces of cardboard, in the rough, on the street, had very little food to eat. And I couldn't understand why. I'd suddenly felt this and I'd never felt it before. And then one day it hit me was that the people I was seeing under the London bridges were white. And what I'd seen before that were black people, and that had become commonplace and just accepted at some level. So there was an unconscious bias at work within me, even though I thought I was so liberal and so in favor of change, and so against the whole idea of people being separate and apart. That was a rude awakening, a big shock to my shame at the time, but I'm glad it happened, because without that I wouldn't have realized that even though we talk big and we think we've got the answers, sometimes there's still an unconscious bias that lives within us that we just have to address and get over. So that's been part of the drive. How does one start to do that? Because we've been taught that you learn about your shadow self, you learn about what's inside by talking to experts like psychologists and psychotherapists and so on. And that's just not the case. So that promoted within me story bridging is really needed. When I was in London, I also met a chap called Elias Sharkur, and he was the Archbishop of a big part of Israel, Galilee, Nazareth, and so on. And what he did was build schools where he made a point of inviting and getting people to attend who were Israeli, but also Muslim and also Jewish. His work was something like Thich Nhat Hanh in Vietnam, who was the Buddhist monk who was nominated by Martin Luther King, I think, for the Nobel Prize. Elias Sharkur was also nominated twice for the Nobel Prize for his work, because he brought people together. And that became a sort of role model for me. We had quite a long exchange and got to know each other quite well. And one of the things that he said, if I can find it, in talking to new students, he would say, yes, you Muslims and Jews are not accepted here out of tolerance. You are not accepted out of Christian charity. You are accepted because I learned and I'm convinced that you are lovable just as you are. And I need you different from me in order to respect you and in order to get to know myself better. And that phrase, you don't have to change, you don't have to be different, you can hold a different view from me. You are lovable, still just as you are. And that was the final story bridging has to come.
Wow. What an incredible story. Thank you so much. I love how you connected the cultural context you've been raised in and lived in, and several specific episodes that really build a bridge to understand why it is so meaningful to you. Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing your moment of shame, which is also a very deep realization. Like this is a big honor. Thank you, Graham. I just feel the story so much, but I have so many more questions and I want to discover them. So here's another one that is a bit more practical, I would say. It's hard to get from a story to the practical point, but we have a format. So I've already asked you about how does story bridging work on different levels, but maybe you could give us some instances or examples of how your model has worked in practice so we can appreciate and maybe try and use it for ourselves in the future.
Okay. I know that many of the people talking at this conference will be sharing their views and their stories. So I'm going to say later on we'll talk about the book that has been written about story bridging, which is loaded with examples and explanations and so on. And at this point, I'll be very brief. But as our audience is mainly business, I guess, and organisational, I'll stay with that at this stage. In the work I've done with story circles, we've been able to shift culture simply by getting a small group of lots of small groups of people together in a safe place, psychologically safe, confidential, who are able to share and are encouraged to share with good facilitation their feelings as well as their information. So at a medium-sized organization, I won't mention their name, in Georgia in the States, a pastoral type institute. They did training and counseling for businesses, found that they had become too militarized. So their soft hearted disappeared, and their culture was one of, as they grew, there were more and more systems, more and more hierarchy, more and more them becoming like any other. And through practicing in conversations and sharing stories and anecdotes, that militaristic culture changed dramatically in the space of about 3 months to one of compassion and caring within, and later on that get carried outside as well. In the book, there are lots of stories about places like Beetroog, which means neighborly care in the Netherlands, where the bridging needed to take place between government and nurses and between nurses and patients. And their system was to measure everything. So the nurses were measured on how long it took to change a patient's bed, to look after the bed sores, to do whatever they had to do, get out of there as quickly as possible onto the next patient. A new boss came in and said, we're losing it. We are not patient-centered. And his bridging method was to talk to everyone, the patients and the nurses, and they started working simply on relationships. So the nurses were allowed to go along, spend all the time chatting, building relationships, and then leave. Nothing was measured. And after about 6 or 9 months, the results compared to what they were before just skyrocketed, just magic, which I think it proved to me that we're people. And we got to stay people. And when I think about humankind, I often think we ought to make sure that we put the kind in capitals. It's humankind. We forget that at our peril. Is that enough for now?
Yes, this is beautiful, and I know our audience will, if they're interested, discover more in your book, which I will address a bit later. But for now, I'm just really curious, like maybe there are some, key methodologies, or maybe philosophical stances, or ideas that one has to adopt in order to be successful at this kind of work. Because I would rather not go into details of how to do story bridging work, and instead ask you about the philosophy behind it, because it's something we could discover in this short time.
Yes. When people first look at the model, and again, I'm referring to the book, not to sell it, but just because that's my reference point. It looks like a very structured model. You move from preparation to engaging, reaching out, engaging, to building a shared space together, a holding space, and to eventually forging a connection, which is more to do with the relationship than it is with the task. And it seems like a very linear, structured model. It's anything but that. And it's far more to do with the unexpected, the unusual, and being flexible enough to adapt constantly to the other person and to yourself as you go along. And that's the way a bridge is built, not through following a set procedure, not by having a magic methodology or solution, but by being open to change within yourself and prepared to accept that the other person is lovable as they are and have as much right to be saying what they say as you have to say what you say. And that's the way we make. That seems like such a simple message, but it's profound for me.
Interesting.
I've found, maybe I'm jumping off onto a tangent here, Artem. I've found that for lots of reasons, which again are in the book, our culture has moved into a different mode, our societal culture. And there are about 5 or 6 reasons for that, which are making story bridging more and more imperative. And I thought I'd just mention them because our tendency is to, oh, there's a problem here. There's a difference of opinion. Let's try and bridge that. Most of the time, there's stuff that needs to be bridged that we're not even aware of. And I think those are the things we have to start looking at in a lot more detail. So I've jotted down a few of those. Gabor Mate, he's written a book called The Myth of Normal. And one of the quotes in his book is that Western civilization is fractured, wounded, traumatized, in severe psychic and existential pain. And we need to do something about this paranoid, combative, separating, divisive mindset in society. So I've looked a bit closer at what's caused this to come about. So first of all, education. There's been a lot of focus on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and maths. That's fine, but we haven't balanced it with humanity. And we can get too clever if we lose our compassion, our kindness, our humanity. And unfortunately, whereas technology used to be an enabler, it seems these days to be the leader. And it's going so fast, and we're trying to follow. And there's too much STEM and not enough technology doing what people need it to do for the people. So that's one of the things. Sometimes very subtle. We can't lose stuff like beauty and love and so on. So if you take the medical profession, now I'm out of my depth because I'm a man talking about childbirth. There's so much happens during the birth of a child. Any of us who have had families would know this. and the bonding that takes place, and the nurturing after that, and the rearing and raising that happens after that. So in the old days, mothers used to go through childbirth, and sometimes the baby was placed on her chest, even before the umbilical cord was cut, even before the baby was washed and cleaned up. Stuff even happened before birth. And touch and being together and social proximity are so important. And the natural processes at a deep psychological level are working in ways that we don't even realize. But then someone has a breakthrough. We know how to do cesarean section. So let's intervene and let the process be quicker. And even better than that, I can do 10 C-sections on a Monday morning. That's efficient. Let's go for it. So now 50 or 60% in some very developed countries are C-sections. Probably 5 to 7% need that intervention. And that technology just crept up on us, and the new norm just happened. Well, we were blissfully unaware of it, and now we're doing it. We need to get back to what really is normal. That's just one again, and there are lots and lots of other examples of that. Another one is character. We develop character according to what big business institutions think they need. So a nice, dominant, assertive, even assertive, aggressive, very sure leader that can be trusted because he knows or she knows exactly what they're doing, and they're going to do it whatever the opposition and the conflict and so on. That's the sort of leader we want, and that's the sort of leader we get, and that's the sort of leader we vote for in politics and so on. So we've actually bred a generation of leaders who have become, because of what's required of them, narcissistic, overbearing, inauthentic, and not good for society and humanity. I'm not saying we're all like that, but the trend is to make people less human when they're in leadership positions. And that happens, that narcissism and so on is not just an individual trait, it's also an entity trait. So you find it in corporations, the arrogance and the it's me first or it's we first and you second and so on. And it's very sad that that's happened. So that's another one. A third one might be rampant capitalism, where, and I'm not knocking capitalism necessarily, but that, capitalism drives our values and our norms and who we are and how we behave. It also has something to do with the way we've damaged the environment, consumerism at all costs, repetitive, never-ending growth model, which is not sustainable, maximization of profits, and not enough of the human side. So nothing wrong with going for profits and going for good profits, but something wrong with not putting back into society and not reining back that rampant capitalism. And some of the tricks that I employ to hijack purpose and principle and that sort of stuff, and to introduce neuroscience and techniques for persuading, using algorithms and convincing people to buy, even without their knowledge. I think we've gone too far, and we need to rein back and do some bridging to decide what a society really wants, what do communities really need, what makes people human, and let's do it, and not just accept these things we're always reacting to, and we're never being proactive about. I hope that came out right. Another one is connection and communication. And there's no doubt that the digital world, for all its strengths and possibilities, has reduced some of our attention spans, has consumed our interest and where we spend our time, has reduced our communicating and relating ability, and has helped us to escape into enclaves and to become isolated and to need bridging. So all of these trends have crept up almost insidiously without us realizing them or knowing it. We no longer see children playing in the neighborhood streets. We no longer see communities being able to engage with a sort of capitalism that is cooperative. People are told and given and imposed upon. So there's bridging, as you can probably hear from what I'm saying, needed at all sorts of levels. And part of it is being aware, being alert to these things that happen without us being aware until too late. So I just wanted to say that because it's become to mean a lot for me of late. When talking about bridging, it's not just a passé subject, it's something that deserves our constant attention, nothing less.
Those are very interesting points, and you comment on such major society issues that I feel sometimes when I hear such statements that there is little we can do as individual professionals, even if we take like the many experts that are present at this conference. It feels like this is just a drop in the ocean, but I believe honestly that story by story we can bridge these gaps if we work on them. So to get a bit more instrumental, here's a question that just pops up in my mind. I've been working with a company who has been seeing their employees as irresponsible. It was just, one of the problems they had. And instead of looking for the reasons for their irresponsibility, we framed the question in such a way that the leaders of the teams were remembering. The question was put like this: remember a time when you were really proud and surprised by an employee who showed more responsibility than you were really expecting from him or her. So what happened? When was it? And what was the story? And this small question prompted them to think in the other direction. So my question to you with this long preface is, are there any specific questions or specific tools or like small steps we could look at from the standpoint of story bridging to even start moving in the right direction and maybe bridge these bridges sometime in the future?
Okay. I've prepared a credo of things that a story bridger needs, which I hope we'll get to soon. If you don't ask the question, I'll give you the answer anyway. Okay. But in the meantime, what you've said is so important. And the word you used was, can we do anything at an individual level? I think it was Margaret Mead once said that nothing in the world has ever changed unless it was done by a very small group of people. And from that flows really huge and big things. So I think there's such power in circle work and individual conversation and in one story at a time. Absolutely no doubt about that. What you're talking about here is making of meaning between people. So asking a question like that touches the emotion as well as the intellect. People in business, the lower the level, the more they probably know about what happens at the coalface and what the answers are, and allowed to express their views and develop meaning and to be involved, magic happens. That's what leaders have to learn. And the mechanism, of course, is story. I've been working with a group, again, I won't mention the name, but locally, where the racial differences are still very acute. And we eventually started off by doing little things. So two of the little things we do are, we call them empathy walks. So if you and I are on opposite sides, our mission one day would be autumn, a beautiful picture behind you, the bridge and the forest. You and I, let's take a walk through it. We don't have to talk. If we do talk, let's talk about things that are common rather than things that are different. Let's build empathy between us, because we probably have families, we probably enjoy certain things, we might read similar books, who knows? And we'll never know unless we have this empathy walk and spend time together. So it doesn't sound like work, and it doesn't sound like something a corporation would do, but an empathy walk can really work magic. Part of that at a deeper level, and this came from a chap called Edgar Schein. He's one of the gurus of corporate culture, as you know. He used a term called humble inquiry. And it was basically started off at universities, where he discovered that specialist professors could not admit that they didn't know everything, or that they might be wrong about something. So he introduced a method which he called humble inquiry, which meant you would ask me, you would inquire of me a question, probably involving meaning, to which you didn't already know the answer. Because that's what professors normally do. So a humble inquiry is posing that which you really don't know. And you're being humble enough to admit that and to ask someone else. So empathy walks and humble inquiry are two of the little things. They're all in the book, that one can employ. It works between bosses and employees as well. Between bosses in one department and another department. It can work if there's a willingness to make it. So yes, absolutely, individual, small basis, huge growth, fantastic, unstoppable potential.
Lovely. Thank you so much for sharing this example. What I feel right now is that your work with story bridging is not like this bridge in particular. It feels like more of a rope bridge. It doesn't have a strict technology. It's fluid and it's unstable, but people meeting in the middle of the bridge feel more connected because there is some kind of, an extreme of going out of your comforted border and meeting in the middle, which is I might need to change the picture. That's what I think.
Oh, don't change. I love the picture. Just have the picture as well.
That's a good thought. All right, Graham.
That's and both instead of either or.
Agreed. Graham, we are nearing the 40-minute limit, so let me ask you this one more question of, can you tell us more about the book that you published with your co-authors? And maybe, like, how did that happen between you? Because publishing a co-authored book, well, requires to building some bridges between the authors, I guess.
Okay, let me tell you first about a couple of things that I mentioned earlier. Some of the magic of story bridging. There's a chap called John Flismas in South Africa. He's a stand-up comedian. He was doing an MBA, having decided the comedian stuff wasn't working for him because they were making fun of things that were too serious. And he didn't like that. One day in his MBA class, a black fellow student suddenly said to him, "I hate you. I really hate you." And that was a moment where there could have been a permanent polarization. But something primed him to act differently. He says, "I realized in the moment that the problem was my inability to compute what my colleague was really saying. And therefore, before reacting with my own stunned pride, I decided to adopt an attitude of non-judgmental inquiry." "That's interesting," I said. "May I ask why?" And that led on to him discovering that his black colleague, his big brother, had been shot by and killed by the police during one of the riots. And there was lots of stuff there that happened that shouldn't have happened. But those two have become friends. So the possibility, you know, a lot of it happens at an implicate rather than an explicate level. So you can walk in a room and know someone's looking at you, even though you don't yet know that they're looking at you. Okay, morphic resonance. Or you can discover that you know, there's a mirror neuron connection happening, and you can imitate or be intimate with another's feelings at that time, more than you can logically extend why. There are lots of, it's all in the book, okay? But these things for me are the important aspect of story bridging, and getting in touch with that magic is what we need to do. So where are we now? Yeah, we connect like neurons in the brain. People connect through the social synapses. That's not neuron and neuron. It's the in-between part. That's where the bridging happens. That's where the synapses, the neurons fire, if you like. And the same thing with people. So that's it, I think. The book, very briefly. I wrote a newsletter in 2018. David Bodger, who's talking at your conference, got in touch with me and said, I liked that because it was about moving from walls to bridges. And he had been tasked with putting together a 3-volume encyclopedia called Story Telling in Business. He said, I'd like a chapter on story bridging. The timing's always too tight. So I called on 2 friends, Terence Gargiulo, who's talking at your conference, and Steve Van Heggie, who's talking at your conference. And the 3 of us put together the chapter. which is about 25 pages, and it's going to be published by World Scientific Publications. They're quite prestigious because they do the Nobel Peace Prizes and textbooks for Stanford and Harvard and other places. And to have story in one of the encyclopedias for the first time, that's quite nice for us storytellers. Anyway, thanks to David, who's a wonderful, as you know, person. Then I think what happened, I spoke at your Storyfy the Leader, Storyfy Your Culture, and now Storyfy Within Borders conferences. And the whole notion has grown, and so has that chapter. So from a short chapter has evolved the book. The one thing I want to say about the book, and it's a lie if you say I'm not selling, I suppose I am, but I don't want to sell. I just want to mention that the book is $4 on Kindle. That's a very low rate. And the reason why I did that was because the publishers did all the design and layout work for free. And we wanted to get the book out to lots and lots of people and not put up any cost constraint. So that's the reason for the low price, not that it's not a good book. In my opinion, of course. So thank you for asking that question. And I'm sorry we didn't have another hour, 2 or 3. But I'm sure you and I will chat, as we do, beyond this.
I hope so very much. Thank you so much, Graham. It's always a pleasure, and thank you for sharing your journey with us. It's been wonderful knowing what drove you to this work and what kind of context is there in the world calling for this work, and even more importantly, how this work might benefit us as humankind. So thank you so much. It was wonderful. I hope we chat again.
Always something new. We never quite get there.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Autumn. Thank you. Bye for now.
Поставьте огонек, если вас тоже тронуло это замечательное выступление.
Put the fires if you also were touched by this wonderful speech. There are some things that we can overcome. There are some of those we cannot. Unfortunately, after this recording, Graham passed away because of a rather difficult disease, cancer. And when I was sharing this with other speakers, we were very touched, and we were also offering help. I told one of the speakers that probably there are things in the world that are obstacles in bridge making, and the other speaker told me that this is probably the case why we invented stories. And I really believe that Graham will be remembered as a kind and nice person because his stories were changing the world. So thank you for listening to him this one last time.